These are the HiVi M10 Plus 2.1 desktop speakers. They have a high-end look with a low-end price point. Hi, my name is Toyd, and if you are not familiar with the channel, we usually build and design high-end speakers, showing you how to save thousands of dollars in the process. But today, we're going to be taking a look at some already built speakers by HiVi, the 2.1 desktop speakers. That means that you get the unique perspective of a speaker designer as we go through this. Now, being a DIYer, I am very familiar with the HiVi name. HiVi makes a lot of drivers for the DIY community, but on top of that, they also make DIY kits like the 3.1A kit that we built right here on the channel. Now, not only that, they also build high-end speakers. And this 2.1 kit is a HiVi Swan speaker kit, but it's on the low end price. And so I was really intrigued with this kit, and mainly because of how it looks. They put this molded front baffle on, and it really does make these look a lot more higher end than the price tag would indicate. Now, they've chosen to do this for quite a few reasons, but one of the main reasons is, of course, to hide the screws. Typically, you're going to see the screws that are mounting both the tweeter and the mid-range on there. And now, because the mid-range and the tweeter are inset to that front baffle, they had to chamfer the edges. And so that's why you see this nice chamfer. And even though they really had to do that in order to redirect the sound to where they needed it to go, it makes for a really nice looking speaker. Now, they didn't just leave that look on the speaker, they also carried it over to the subwoofer that comes with the unit as well. It has that same basic design, which really makes that subwoofer look really nice. Now, if we flip that subwoofer around, we're going to notice that they added a subwoofer volume knob on the back, and we're also going to see some of the inputs that it has on there. It does have a line input, as well as a Bluetooth input, a digital fiber optic, and a digital coax input. When we turn that subwoofer back around, we are going to notice that it does have one silver knob. Now, that silver knob is for the volume control, and if you push it in, it can also change the inputs. Now, in order to hook these up, you do plug the speaker wire directly up to the back of the subwoofer. This is where I all of a sudden found my first miss with this system. Unfortunately, there's no way to easily change the size of the wire that you need, whether you want to shorten it or lengthen it. If we take a look at the back of the speakers, you're going to see that that wire is connected in there with no easy way to take that out. And unfortunately, on the back of the subwoofer, it is a computer style connector. So if you want to shorten those up, you're going to be using wire ties. And if you want to lengthen those, well, you're probably going to be cutting and soldering. So the first thing I wanted to do is set the speakers up and listen to them. And I wanted to find out how the subwoofer integrated with these speakers. I wanted to listen to them how I think most people would hook these up, which is just putting them directly on the desk. So the two speakers directly down, they're not facing my ears, not ear level, anything like that. They're going to be facing directly forward. It sounded exactly like what I thought it would sound. It was very muddy, and the mid bass was just too loud. So I wanted to hook up my microphone to see exactly what was going on. When we take a look at these measurements, we're going to see that the mid bass was way too high on the satellite speakers. It just was not a great sound. That was a little disappointing for me, just because I think that's how a lot of people would want to use these, but it's not the only way that you can use these. Now, on a positive note, if we take a look at how they integrated the subwoofer with the satellite speakers, we can get this to match up really well with no peaks or valleys, which was really surprising to me. They did a really great job integrating this subwoofer. Now, if we take away the satellite speakers for a minute and just unplug those, we're going to see the response of the subwoofer, which is about what we would expect out of a speaker of this price point. But one of the things that did disappoint me was, unfortunately, the shallowness of the slope. This does allow some voices to come through the subwoofer when you're playing the subwoofer by itself. It would have been nice to see a steeper slope there. Having said that, when you have your satellite speakers on and you have your subwoofer in a typical spot like on the ground, you're not going to hear those voices through the subwoofer. So there is a positive note there. However, that comes to another issue that I realized right away with these, and that was where the volume control knob is. The volume control knob is on the subwoofer. Now, there is a remote control with it, but if this is on a desktop, it's much easier to just turn up and down the volume from the knob. If the subwoofer is on the ground, you can't make that adjustment. And not only that, the subwoofer adjustment to turn up and down the subwoofer is also on the back of the subwoofer. So once again, if that's on the ground or somewhere not easily accessible, that's going to become problematic for whoever's using this system. I wasn't a huge fan of how they laid that out. I would have much rather seen that on one of the speakers. And that's where something else came up that I noticed. When I was taking these measurements, I wanted to know which one was the right and the left. And unfortunately, the speaker wire is all the same color, and there's no easy way to determine which one is right or left. So by moving those controls to the front of the speaker, we could have easily known which one was right or left when we're setting these up. For now, you just have to follow the speaker wire and then place them accordingly. Now, of course, this is not the end of the review. I wanted to figure out what was the best way for anyone to listen to them. And on axis is typically the best way to listen to any speaker. Now that basically means just put it up on ear level and point the speakers towards your ears. That's usually how speaker designers design speakers. And this appears to be the case with the HiVi as well. So when we put these at ear level and then take the measurement, there's a couple things that I really need to point out with this response. First, let's take a look at this dip right here in the 1.4 to 1.5 kilohertz range. This was relatively disappointing. This is most likely where the crossover meets. HiVi has a lot of drivers to choose from, and it appears that they picked two drivers that just didn't mate up very well with each other. And what I mean by that is typically when you choose a crossover point with the two drivers, you want them to overlap a little. So that way when you cross over, there can be a nice even response at the crossover point. Now, if that's in phase as we go off axis, that stays consistent as far as being even. In this particular case, it does stay consistent as far as being even. Unfortunately, that even is a huge dip at 1.4, 1.5 kilohertz. The good news about that is because it stays consistently even, you could EQ this out fairly easily. The bad news is that is an area with a lot of sound, and you will be missing that sound out of these speakers unless you EQ them. Keep in mind, when you're designing speakers, it's always a compromise. And in the $150 range, there's going to be compromises. That's just the way it's going to be. But we're going to take a look at another compromise that HiVi did, and this one I do believe could have been avoided. If we take a look at the high end, we're going to see this major peak. Now this is caused by diffraction. As sound exits the drivers and hits the edge of the baffle, that sound is going to diffract, and sometimes you'll get these diffraction peaks and dips. Now there are ways to get rid of this, and unfortunately I do believe that the shape that they chose is actually adding to this diffraction, making it much worse than what it would typically be with a speaker like this. Now if we go off axis, we're going to see that this starts to change, and that's exactly what we would see when diffraction is causing this issue. That does mean that this is something that is relatively fixable for you by just not pointing the speakers directly at your ears, but instead turning them a little out so that it's not hitting you directly in the ears and you're not getting that huge peak. But because of that peak and because of that loss at that 1.5 kilohertz, the speakers sounded bright, and there was definitely some sound that was missing. And for someone that's doing critical listening, that's going to be an issue. Now, for those who are playing video games, listening to the occasional song, and mainly watching YouTube channels, these are probably not going to be make or break problem areas, but they are areas that I think you should be aware of. Now, another thing that we didn't talk about was the sound quality of the subwoofer. How does the subwoofer sound? And truthfully, the subwoofer sounds exactly what I would think it would. It's hollow sounding, and that's because there's really no bracing in there. It does get boomy, and if you turn that subwoofer up too much, you are going to start to hear mechanical noises coming from the subwoofer. It's not tight, clean bass like I would like something like on the M6. But these are things that we kind of expect out of speakers this price point. I was hoping that since HiVi created their own drivers that they would have some of these issues worked out. Unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be pretty standard for this price point. Having said that, I would still take them over the Edifier MR4s that I've reviewed before, but I wouldn't take them over the Dayton Audio M6, which I just recently reviewed. If you haven't watched that review, you should watch it. All right, guys, I want to hear from you. What do you think of these speakers? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Tell me down in the comments below. This is Toyd. I'm out.